Good afternoon. Today I will be discussing with you the NBA salary cap and its effect on team success. So the National Basketball Association, better known as the NBA, currently faces the issue of competitive imbalance, meaning that the competition is not necessarily even keel across the league. This is especially evident given that the past 5 NBA finals have shown the Golden State Warriors making 5 appearances and the Cleveland Cavaliers making 4 appearances. Now, in a completely fair 30-team league, it is highly improbable that the same 2 teams would make it this far in 5 consecutive seasons, suggesting that the current state of the NBA is not fair. Coincidentally, the NBA also is the only professional sports league that uses a soft cap model for their salary cap. This means that even though there is an established salary cap, organizations are allowed to spend over this cap by paying a certain fee as a punishment that is determined by how much over a team is spending over the salary cap. The soft salary cap is actually meant to promote competitive balance by giving flexibility to less successful teams to sign better players throughout the season and off-season. But recent evidence has suggested that large market teams with more capital at their disposal hold a competitive advantage over smaller market teams by being able to outpay for better players. Now, keeping in mind that the uniqueness of the NBA salary cap and how it affects teams differently based on their market size, this led me to the development of my question: to what extent do NBA salary cap rules affect the success of teams based on their market sizes? Through my research, I aimed to find out if the NBA salary cap gave an advantage to larger market teams. But before I developed my study design, I first had to do some background research to see what the current conversation was between researchers regarding the effects of the NBA salary cap regulations on team success. And since my study is based on the notion that there is truly an issue regarding competitive imbalance in the league, it was first important for me to find evidence that supported this claim. In a study by researcher Ira Horowitz of the University of Florida, he found that through the examination of every NBA playoffs since 1984, that there is in fact an issue regarding competitive imbalance, especially in the playoffs. As far as his reasoning for this occurrence, there are basically 2 schools of thought for why the modern NBA is unfair. The first of which is the theory that better players are attracted to larger market lifestyles. This theory was pioneered by sports reporter and analyst Jimmy Spencer in 2018, and while he does not develop his own study design, he refers to the evidence of 2 similar studies to support his claim. The first of which was a study by Dennis Coates and Brad Humphreys in 2005, who found that large market teams have more money to invest in newer stadiums and training facilities that would attract more all-star caliber players. Additionally, a study by Yupin Yang and Associates found that more popular brands are more likely to partner with players from larger market teams, motivating players in seek of the team that would grant them the highest monetary value towards larger market teams. The second theory for the reasoning behind competitive imbalance in the NBA was developed by sports analyst Prashab Menon in 2016. He claims that the NBA soft salary cap regulations allow for more teams with more money, which is large market teams, to directly pay players more money because they can afford the fines that they would be forced to pay. He supports this claim by referencing how the Cleveland Cavaliers consistently spent over the designated salary cap in 2016 and 2017, leading to their first ever NBA championship in 2016. Even with these 2 theories, there still lacks specific statistical evidence that would suggest that either the salary cap regulations would cause competitive imbalance or the difference in market sizes would cause competitive imbalance. So through my methodology, I aimed to make the conclusion of whether either of these 2 theories were true. So in an effort to answer the research question, I developed a study that would analyze statistics regarding the NBA team market sizes and the success of each team. I then took the results of my study and compared them with the amount that teams were spending on their respective rosters in an attempt to recognize patterns of team spending based on their market size and their return on investment, which would in this case be success within the league. Ideally, the best research would be for me to develop an experiment in which I would actually manipulate all the NBA teams by forcing them to spend as much as they could on the salaries of their players and then analyzing the caliber of the team that they would be able to produce. However, this is not feasible as a small researcher with limited resources. This means that I had to go with the alternative, which would be investigating the spending habits of teams based on their market size and their consequential success within the league from prior years by collecting existing statistics using spreadsheets regarding such categories. My conclusion would allow me to claim whether or not there is an association between the spending habits of teams as well as their market size in relation to their success within the league. Now, as far as ethical considerations go for my project, there were none. This research was quickly approved by an Institutional Review Board, or IRB, due to its lack of ethical concern. My study design revolves around analyzing pre-existing data regarding NBA teams and players who are already public figures. This means that I would not have to go through any extra precautions to keep the identities of my subjects classified. As far as the selection of my subjects, since my study revolves around NBA teams spending based on their market size and their consequential success, the best representation of the data regarding NBA teams is NBA teams themselves. So I decided to collect statistics from all 30 NBA teams and their respective cities that they are headquartered in, and rather than collecting performance statistics of each player on the team, it was more efficient for me to collect this combined team statistics, which would also give me a more accurate representation of overall team performance resulting from the investments of executives. Not only that, but I collected this data from multiple seasons, specifically the 5 NBA seasons recurring between 2014 and 2015, to create a larger sample size and eliminate as much bias as possible. Now, as far as my procedure, I decided to make 3 different tracking sheets, one regarding the performance statistics of each team, one regarding the market size data of each team, and the third and final one being the salary expenditures, the average salary expenditures of these teams over that 5-year period. And here's an example of the first tracking sheet that I made, which is in referral to the tracking sheet for performance statistics for each team. And as you can see, I organized it by team name, average points per game over that 5-season period from 2014 to 2019, their average assists per game, steals per game, blocks per game, shooting percentage, their MVPs, the average amount of wins that they would earn, the average amount of losses that they earn, and their average championships, number of championships that they earned within this 5-year period. And from this tracking sheet, I was able to deduce that the best way for me to quantify a team's success within the league would be wins. So this would be the variable that I used to test against other variables. My next tracking sheet that I used was the tracking sheet of market size aspects. And as you can see, I organized it by the team name, the location of where the team plays, which would be the city that they reside in, the population of the city, the median age of the people who reside in that city, the median income of the people who reside in that city, the net worth of each respective team, the stadium capacity of the stadiums that each team plays in, and the number of championships that they've won in that team's lifetime. And from this tracking sheet, I was able to deduce that the best way for me to quantify a team's market size is through its net worth. So this would be the variable that I use to test against other variables in the future of my research. And then the final tracking sheet that I made, the final spreadsheet that I made, was the average salary expenditures of every NBA team within that 5-year period. And as you can see here, I ranked every single team from 1 to 30 based on the amount of money that they would spend on their respective rosters in this allotted time. So using a statistics application, I was able to create 2 scatter plots with LSRLs representing the relationships between wins and net worth and wins and average salary expenditure. The LSRL, or line of least squared residuals, which is just a line of best fit, has a corresponding R and R square values, which can be used to interpret the strength of the relationship. In this scenario, we want these values to be as close to 0 as possible, which would indicate that there is no relationship, meaning that market size and average salary expenditures have no effect on a team's average wins. The first conclusion that must be made is whether or not a team's market size shows a consequential effect on its success within the league. The statistics used to measure the relationship are each team's net worth and their corresponding average wins. The strength of this relationship can be measured by the R and R square values that are computed through this LSRL in the statistics application, which display their association. And when using this application, the slope of the LSRL was found to be negative and linear, and the R value is found to be 0.122, and the R squared value is found to be 0.015. This means that the relationship between a team's market size and its success is very weak, with only approximately 1.5% of the variation in how many wins a team gets can be explained by a team's market size. Not only that, but this relationship is negative, suggesting that even with what little strength this relationship has, a larger market size would actually lead to less wins. This evidence directly negates the findings of Jimmy Spencer, who theorized that larger market teams hold a competitive advantage over smaller market teams due to their larger market lifestyles. Just a reminder, Spencer's theory was backed up by the research of Yupin Yang and Associates, who found that popular brands are more likely to create partnerships with large market teams, which would in turn attract talent with financial interest to larger market teams. These studies, however, failed to make a statistical connection between these external motivators and its effect on the success of and its effect on the success of the corresponding teams, which makes my research more effective with specific data to back up my conclusions that a team's market size has little to no effect on their success within the league. With it being concluded that the market size of a team has a minimal effect on the amount of wins that a team gets, it was important for me to evaluate the effect of an organization's capital expenditures on their rosters on their success within the league. This relationship can again be analyzed through an LSRL, representing the relationship between each team's average salary expenditures and their average wins by displaying the R and R squared values. The LSRL was found to be linear and negative with an R value of 0.329 and an R squared value of 0.108, meaning that the relationship is moderately weak and approximately 10.8% of the variation in how many wins a team gets on average can be explained by their average salary expenditures for their roster. This invalidates the conclusions made by Prashad Menon, who argued that the current salary cap system is the root of competitive imbalance within the league. By analyzing this LSRL, it becomes obscenely evident, especially because even with a weak relationship, the LSRL displays a negative trend in average wins as salary expenditure increases, suggesting that teams that actually spend more money on their rosters could expect a lower return on investment in regards to consequential wins. So while this research may contribute new insights, it is inherently limited by its lack of fully detailed financial information regarding the salary expenditures of each respective roster and its relatively small sample size. The evaluation of the total salary expenditures provides a general overview of its impact on team performance. However, a fully detailed account of each player's contracts with their respective teams would produce a more reliable conclusion. This information is available on the official NBA statistics website, yet given the time frame to complete my research, it became impractical to collect this specific data if I were to be able to evaluate the statistics regarding each team's market size. In regards to the relatively small sample size, ideally every year since the implication of the soft salary cap model in the NBA would be analyzed to draw conclusions. However, the time frame of the study would not allow for a larger number of NBA seasons to be analyzed. Even so, the sample size is still large enough for these results to be significant. There must be some variable with a significant effect on how many wins a team would get, and with the data suggesting that more successful teams are actually spending less money on their rosters, a reasonable variable to test next would be draft picks. If teams are able to draft young, talented, and low-paying rosters through the annual NBA draft, it is possible that this would lead to greater success within the league, thus making this research a reasonable next step. However, for now, it can only be concluded that the current NBA salary cap system is successfully completing its job by preventing competitive imbalance. It does so by holding no effect on a team's consequential wins, meaning that not noticing the effects of larger or smaller average salary expenditures implies that it's preventing large market teams from holding a competitive advantage. These are my works cited. Thank you for your time.
How is this method you choose aligned with the purpose of your research?
So the purpose of my research was to find statistically significant evidence to suggest that there either is a relationship between NBA salary cap regulations and their market size and consequential wins, or there isn't statistically significant evidence. So for me to analyze prior statistics that already exist that are published by the NBA themselves, this would be the most effective means for me to carry out my research, other than actually being able to carry out an experiment in which I could control the spending habits of every NBA team, which is just not feasible. So looking at these statistics from these past 5 years was the next best option for me to go about my research.
Which of the various perspectives you explored was the most difficult for you to incorporate into your research inquiry, and why?
So it was most difficult for me to analyze a team's market size because there are so many more variables that go into a team's market size in comparison to how many variables go into how much money a team is pouring into their roster. So it was pretty evident by the evidence that I showed that only 1.5% of the variation of wins that a team could get was explained by their market size, but that was also because I was assuming that net worth is the most valid aspect of a team's market size, that I could quantify a market size in that regard, if that makes sense.
If you could revisit the research process, what would you do differently?
I would focus all of my attention on the NBA salary cap rather than NBA salary cap and its effect on market sizes, just because that there's more data published by the NBA themselves, which would be more reliable for me to interpret when I'm going about my research. And then on top of that, there's also a lot less aspects that go into factoring how a team decides to spend their money on their rosters rather than all the aspects that make up the team's market size. So that's how I would change it.